So here is the story we're going to talk about. Here's all the awards that have been won by Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, right? So unbelievably decorated, award-winning journalism outlet, and the government pretends to back this up, right? So that's this is Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and he says media freedom plays an indispensable role in informing the media, holding governments accountable, and telling stories that otherwise would not be told. The U.S. will continue to stand up for the brave and necessary work of journalists around the world, and he's saying this at the Summit for Democracy. And why is that ironic? Because here, simultaneously, they are trying to kill Julian Assange, the decorated award-winning journalist, for doing journalism and exposing crimes inside the governments, the warring governments and their war crimes. So there it is. The UK court rules Julian Assange can be extradited to the United States. And what Glenn tweeted out was the U.S. extradition request will now be sent to the U.K. Home Secretary Priti Patel, expected to rubber stamp it. Assange says he'll appeal regardless. His freedom, if it ever comes, is now years away, and he remains silenced exactly as the Biden administration wants. And what Max Blumenthal said was, we're witnessing the slow motion assassination of a journalist laundered through a transatlantic legal masquerade. A state security marionette in judicial robes has handed Assange over to his would-be killers. Now, why is this so crazy is because when they tried to prosecute him before, they decided they couldn't. When Joe Biden and Barack Obama tried to prosecute Julian Assange before, they decided they couldn't. And why? Because justice officials said they looked hard at Assange, but realized that they have what they described as the New York Times problem. What is the New York Times problem, Jimmy? Well, if the Justice Department indicted Assange, it would also have to prosecute the New York Times and other news organizations and writers who publish classified material, including the Washington Post and Britain's The Guardian newspaper, according to the officials who spoke on a condition of anonymity. And if you are not going to prosecute journalists for publishing classified information, which the Department of Justice is not going to do, then there is no way to prosecute Assange. That's what they were concluding under Barack Obama and Joe Biden's administration. But what has changed? What changed since then? Well, what changed since then is that WikiLeaks revealed information on the Democratic Party, and a lot of people had to resign over it. So he revealed the malfeasance inside the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. 3 more top DNC officials out after WikiLeaks email release. So the real crime, so what they're actually trying to punish Julian Assange for is when he revealed crimes, war crimes of the United States government. But the real reason why they're going back to try to prosecute him now is because of this, because he actually revealed malfeasance inside the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's campaign, and people had to step down. And that's why they're going after him. And if you don't think so, watch this. This is one of the big YouTube hosts talking about Julian Assange.
Very big.
He's very big. Here we go.
Well, obviously it's hard to tell who's telling the truth here. But lately, I have to confess that WikiLeaks has not had an astounding record. You know, the way that Assange seems to be backing Donald Trump over and over and over again, it makes me very seriously question Assange's efforts to actually be a journalist and not to be a partisan. And I get it. I get why he hates the Democrats. They're trying to put him in prison. Okay.
Right. But
at the same time,
so are Republicans. Let's be clear about that.
And now the Republicans are too, and they have been in the past. But it seems like Assange has picked a side, and
he picked the side of the guy currently trying to kill him, according to Cenk Uygur and his logic brain.
And look, it makes me question his reporting. And so, and so that's the situation we're in now. So now, is he just leaking things that he gets, and no matter what, in which case I would respect that? Or is he selectively leaking based on his political motives? Now that suspicion is out there and it's real and it's possible, well, now I'm concerned that it can't be trusted.
So there you go. He can't be trusted because they've now framed Julian Assange as being a Trumper and a partisan. And that comes from a guy who formed an organization called the Justice Democrats, a political party inside the Democratic Party, and tells you to only vote for Democrats. He's saying another journalist has picked a side, and that's why he can't be trusted. The irony of there is not lost on me. So let's bring in Glenn Greenwald. Now, Glenn, that is the case, correct? That the reason why they are now deciding to prosecute Julian Assange for revealing war crimes of our government, the reason why is because he crossed the Democratic Party and the establishment, right?
Right. So, I mean, obviously, we all find stupid people irritating, but one of the benefits of stupidity is that sometimes comes with candor. And one of the clips that you played of one of the world's dumbest people, Cenk Uygur, he's essentially admitting that the reason he no longer regards Julian Assange as a journalist was because his reporting was designed to help one side. In other words, the minute you start doing things that help the Republican Party or undermine the Democratic Party, it's not that you're a bad journalist, it's that you now actually ought to go to prison. The context of that discussion was the attempt to prosecute, extradite, and ultimately imprison Julian Assange. So unless you think that helping the Republican Party is a crime, there's no reason to raise the issue of the fact that his reporting seems to have reflected poorly on the Democrats and better on the Republicans. But that is what they think. They really do believe that the Republican Party is so extreme, so dangerous, so fascist that to oppose the Democrats at this point is tantamount to being a criminal. They believe that anybody who deviates from Democratic Party dogma ought to be censored off the internet. They believe that, as in January 6th, anybody who protests against the Democratic Party or their agenda or their interests ought to be imprisoned for very long periods of time. And here you have what is clearly a partisan-driven prosecution. It is absolutely the case, Jimmy, that not one thing has changed from the time that the Obama administration in 2013 concluded that even though they wanted to prosecute Assange, there'd be no way for them constitutionally to do so because of that New York Times problem. Namely, how do you single out Assange and prosecute him, but not prosecute the New York Times, The Guardian, El País, and all the other major media outlets with whom he partnered that published the same documents? So the Obama administration, and let's remember, the vice president in that administration was someone named Joe Biden. He was part of this effort, spent 3 years convening a grand jury and investigating, and they leaked to the press that what they were looking for was something that would show that Assange did something that removed him from the category of journalist, that he didn't just receive this information the way that the New York Times, The Guardian, and many other newspapers did, but that he collaborated or conspired in a criminal way with Chelsea Manning such that he became part of that criminal conspiracy. And they concluded that even after looking everywhere, the powers of a grand jury are extremely invasive. They subpoena people, they subpoena records, they read emails, they can do everything. They find everything. They look everywhere, under every nook and cranny. They found nothing to suggest that Julian Assange did anything beyond what journalists always do, and therefore concluded that despite how badly the CIA wanted his head on a pike, they were urging the Obama White House to do it anyway. Remember, we just had 2 months ago, a report from Yahoo News that right at the same time in 2013, when the Obama administration was actively considering prosecuting Assange, the CIA was actively plotting to figure out how to kidnap him or even assassinate him. That's what Yahoo News reported just 2 months ago. That's how eager they were to destroy Julian. So obviously, if they could have found anything or even concocted anything, they would have done so. They didn't because they couldn't. The only thing that changed between 2013 when they decided that, the Democrats, and now when they're not only so eager to prosecute and extradite Assange, they had a chance in January when the court ruled in his favor and rejected the extradition request on the grounds that the U.S. prison system is too harsh and would likely lead him to suicide. Civil liberties groups said, now's your chance, Joe Biden and the Biden DOJ, to drop this prosecution, to say, look, we tried. You could tell the CIA you tried, but you lost. They ignored those pleas, the Biden DOJ did. And not only did they appeal that decision, the court's decision to reject the extradition request, not only did they appeal it, they demanded that Assange be kept in prison pending the appeal, So he's already been detained in a tiny one-bedroom apartment with no outdoor space for 7 years when he had asylum in Ecuador in central London, followed by 2 years in this high-security, supermax, basically prison in the UK where terrorist suspects are put. It's the Belmarsh prison in 2004. The BBC called it Britain's Guantanamo Bay. He's now been there for 2 years, so 9 years in detention. And the Biden DOJ demands that the court keep him in prison, even though he just won, pending appeal. So now he's spent the entire 1 more year in prison. And the court now comes and says that extradition is permissible. As you say, the only thing that has changed is that it was politically untenable in 2013 to prosecute him, because so many people were saying it would go on Obama's legacy, that he was the first person ever to prosecute a journalist under the Espionage Act. Joe Biden has no qualms, obviously, about that. Why? Because the Democrats have completely turned against Julian Assange, not because of any damage to national security, not because of what he did in 2010, but because of what he did in 2016. Even though that's not part of the indictment, he reported authentic documents that reflected poorly on Hillary Clinton, caused the top 5 officials of the DNC to resign in disgrace. It showed the DNC was cheating in order to help Hillary Clinton stave off Bernie Sanders' primary challenge. Remember, Tulsi Gabbard was the vice chair of the DNC at that time. She resigned, alleging that they were doing that. These documents vindicated that. And in March of 2017, so 3 months after Hillary lost, she said the only reason she lost, she was like, I was on my way to my entitled victory. And the only reason I lost was because Jim Comey reopened a criminal investigation and WikiLeaks published these documents. So the Democrats blame Julian Assange for causing Hillary Clinton to lose. And that is why they want to see him in prison for the rest of his life. So just think about what that means. Their motives are not legal. They're not national security. They're political. He's really like a political prisoner. He's being prosecuted. He's currently in prison for the crime of doing reporting, just as Cenk said, that helped the Republican Party defeat the Democratic Party in 2016. It's as tyrannical and authoritarian as it gets, punishing and imprisoning a journalist because he did reporting that reflected poorly on your political party.
So I thought the big threat to journalism and freedom of speech in the First Amendment was Donald Trump being mean to Jim Acosta. That's what I thought. In fact, Jim Acosta was asked about this very case when he was doing the rounds for his book, which was patting himself on the back for speaking truth to power, which Jim Acosta will never do. He was at the museum in Washington, D.C., and Matt Orfalea confronted him and asked him this question.
My understanding about the Julian Assange.
So he asked him about the Julian Assange case. And what do you think about them using the Espionage Act to prosecute journalists for publishing classified documents? That was the question. He never answers it, but watch what he does say.
Assange situation is that, he is being charged not just for trying to speak truth to power and trying to reveal things. He is in trouble for other things. And, what we've seen during the 2016 campaign, where there were contacts between WikiLeaks and Russian operatives.
So there he is. He jumped. Now, that's supposed to be America's #1 newsman who's speaking truth to power. And there he is completely lying about what's going on. They're not prosecuting Julian Assange because of what he did in 2016. That's not what he's being prosecuted for, technically. I mean, or even in the documents. He's being prosecuted for the war crimes he revealed, not for the stuff he revealed about the Democratic Party, the DNC, and the Hillary Clinton campaign, or his work with Russia, or any of that, which is all made up, which he's just making this up. So now he's going to 2016. He says where there were contacts between WikiLeaks and Russian operatives. Okay, here we go.
That, I think, takes WikiLeaks and Julian Assange into sort of a different category than just a straight news organization, straight publisher of news around the world. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not rendering a verdict on Julian Assange. I think he should have his day in court. I think we should see what the facts are, see what they're presented, and let a court.
So what Jim Acosta is saying there, it doesn't seem obvious at first. What he's saying is, yes, we should prosecute journalists for doing journalism and then have him have his day in court. Instead of being up in arms, he was never, ever prosecuted by Donald Trump. He wrote a whole book about his persecution from Donald Trump. But he's never been prosecuted. Guess who is? Julian Assange is actually being prosecuted for doing journalism, and he thinks that's acceptable. I'll play a little bit more of this, and I'll throw it to Glenn.
I'll let that process play out. I do think that there is a value in whistleblowers, no question about it. And I do think that there is a value in people inside the government dealing with journalists to shine a light on government secrets. No question about it. I mean, during the writing of this book, you can imagine how there are Trump folks who are deeply fearful of speaking on the record with me. I only got a couple of folks to speak on the record with me. Most of them wanted to speak on background. I talked to a national security official with the Trump administration who told me that he didn't know whether or not President Trump was pursuing U.S. interests and was concerned about some of the things that he was doing in terms of his dealings with Vladimir Putin. This official obviously would not be able to talk about those kinds of things on the record. He would be in a lot of trouble. But we need that kind of information. And so I do understand what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, what the spirit of what they're trying to do, but I can't sit here and endorse everything that they've done and the tactics that they've used to go about presenting the information that they gather to the world. And I hope you can appreciate where I'm coming from on that. That's really all I have to say on the topic.
But I'm specifically asking, thank you for your response. But specifically, I asked about the indictments under the Espionage Act. Yeah. Not allegations of Russian collusion, which the Mueller report said
laws should not be abused to punish journalists and punish publishers of information. But I can't on the fly here interpret what is going on in the Julian Assange case and give you a satisfactory answer that's going to make you feel as though I'm siding with him.
So there you go. He claims ignorance about the case, although he does throw around the accusation that Julian Assange was working with Russia, which has nothing to do with the case. And so, again, there's the number one newsman misinforming people and also playing ignorant while he cheers on the prosecution of a journalist. Anything you'd like to say about that?
I have a lot to say about that. It's amazing. I hadn't seen this clip before, so I'm going to have a little bit of trouble containing my revulsion and contempt and disgust and nausea for Jim Acosta, and especially for those piece of shit liberals in the audience clapping. Yes. Did you hear those people clapping?
Yes.
When he essentially was obviously justifying the idea that Julian Assange should be prosecuted. I mean, the minute you say, well, let's see what he has to say in the courtroom, you're essentially saying you believe the U.S. government should extradite him and put him on trial to stand trial. That's an extraordinarily repugnant thing for a journalist to say. And it reminds me, during the Snowden reporting, that's the stuff they were saying about myself and about Edward Snowden all the time. And this is, I think, such an important point. I've been talking about Jim Acosta for the last 2 days, and bringing up that book that he wrote in 2018, which idiot liberals consumed, that was designed to herald him as this kind of like brave, imperiled, dissident journalist. It was called The Enemy of the People, A Dangerous Time to Tell the Truth in America by Jim Acosta. As though like Jim Acosta, this completely banal, cliched, empty, pointless, harmless, manicured, blown dry, blowhard is like ever fucking a threat to anybody. Like whatever happened to Jim Acosta during the Trump years? Absolutely nothing. Like Trump would occasionally mock him with a mean tweet, and they would act as though the First Amendment were on fire because of that, while Julian Assange was sitting in prison, and that was something they never cared about because they don't care about press freedom. They care about their little clique. And I think, this really gets to the heart of it, the fact that so much of what he said reveals journalistic rot. Like the idea that if you get relevant information from the Russians, that somehow means that what you've done can be prosecuted. Journalists get information from all kinds of sources all the time. The foundation of modern journalism is that even if your source commits a crime to get information to you that the public has the right to know, as a journalist, not only are you not a criminal by publishing it, it's your duty to do that. Daniel Ellsberg was prosecuted for leaking the Pentagon Papers, which showed that the U.S. government had been lying systematically about the Vietnam War to the American people for more than a decade. But the New York Times was praised for having published it. Edward Snowden is being prosecuted for giving me documents that, according to the government, he had no right to take, but our reporting on it won the Pulitzer. This distinction is critical. That's what you do when you're a journalist, is you get information wherever you can find it. And, here in Brazil, the reason Lula is free and able to run for president next year is because a courageous and heroic source broke the law to get information by hacking telephones, according to the government, and gave it to me and enabled me to do that reporting. So even if Julian Assange got his information from the Russians, it's still not his right, just his right, but his duty to go and report that. But what he's implicitly saying is that if you don't get your information as a journalist from the credentialed, approved sources, you heard what he said.
Yes.
I talked to intelligence officials. Those are the people that you're supposed to go and get your information from. But the minute you go and get your information from an outside source, from a disapproved source, you turn into a potential criminal, someone who then has to go into court and have lawyers and defend yourself against the Justice Department, which has infinite resources under an extremely repressive law, which is the Espionage Act of 1917, that was enacted by Woodrow Wilson to criminalize dissent over whether the U.S. should get involved in World War I. It's one of the most repressive statutes. It's the same one that they're using to prosecute Edward Snowden. And I don't know if you remember this, Jimmy, but like in 2013, 2014, 2015, all these Democrats like Hillary Clinton and John Kerry and Joe Biden would say, oh, if Edward Snowden is such a patriot, he should man up and come back and, make his case to a jury and let them decide whether he did was justifiable. They were lying the entire time because under the Espionage Act, you're barred from raising the defense that, yes, you revealed classified information, but you were justified in doing so because it revealed crimes on the part of the government. That was when Daniel Ellsberg went into court and tried to make that defense. He said, yes, of course I leaked the top secret Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. I did it because I was justified as a citizen. It was my duty as a citizen because the government had been lying to the public about the war. And I felt I had an obligation, and the court ruled, and it was upheld, that under the Espionage Act, that's not a defense. You're not even allowed to raise that defense. So they're prosecuting Julian under a law, the same one they're using for Snowden and Ellsberg, where you basically have no chance. Your conviction is guaranteed. So when Jim Acosta says, well, let's see what he has to say in court, he's obviously endorsing it. And this is what I really think is the heart of the matter, Jimmy, is we all have this conception of what journalists are supposed to do. It's what Jim Acosta dressed up in a costume and pretended to be doing on the cover of his book, which is that you speak truth to power, you risk your liberty in order to take on power centers by revealing the hidden dangerous truths that they don't want known. Obviously, the Jim Acostas of the world never do that. Julian Assange is what they all pretend to be. He's an actual dissident. He's an actual journalist. He's actually somebody who has repeatedly risked his liberty in order to reveal the truth to the public that actual power centers don't want revealed. Not somebody like Jim Acosta, who's a good little boy who goes and tells the public what the CIA tells him to go tell the public. And the reason they hate Julian Assange so much, in part, it's because he's never been part of their little club. The same reason they hate Joe Rogan, or they hate you, or they hate me, that we're able to build a large audience. We're able to do real journalism without submitting to their little clique and all the repressive rules of their corporate world that they have to submit to. They hate the fact that they can't control us. So part of it is that they hate him for that reason. But the real reason they hate him is because he's like a mirror constantly being held up, showing them the truth of what they are, not the mythology that they like to pretend that they are. And the truth that they see in that mirror that he holds up is repulsive. They feel shame and emptiness inside because they know that the reason he's in prison and the reason they're, in a hair salon with a multi-million-dollar contract from a big media corporation is because they're obedient little girls and boys who do the bidding of the U.S. government and don't fucking threaten anybody. It's just a costume. It's LARPing. They're playing a role. That real dissidents end up where Julian Assange is. And that's why they hate him. And that's why they want to get rid of him and silence him and make him disappear, because he's a reminder to the public of what journalists are supposed to do that they would never do, that they're too cowardly to do, that they're incapable of doing. And this is where this hatred is coming from. So the government wants him silenced because they don't want him telling the truth anymore. The Democrats want him disappeared because he reported negatively on Hillary Clinton. And these employees of media corporations who have the job title of journalists hate him and want him destroyed because they remind the public of what they're supposed to be but aren't. So it's this kind of perfect storm of all the establishment lackeys who are uniting together to either remain silent or cheer as the US and UK governments launch what is clearly the gravest press freedom attack in the West in many, many years.
Hey, come see one of our live stand-up shows December 10th or 17th or New Year's Eve at the Two Roads Theater in Studio City, California. See you there. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all tickets.